As I got older, I'm 72, and after I retired, things changed. My once busy life as an entrepreneur began to get quieter. My quote-unquote friends that made up my working life began dropping off and disappearing. My body started talking back, knee pain, foot pain, cancer. One's mind can begin to go over perceived slights at 3 a.m., all the regrets and all the things that can't be fixed. Buddhist teaching begins right there, not in some retreat or wellness weekend at the local spa, but right there in the ordinary ache and pains of being human. There's suffering, and there's an end to suffering. That's the heart of it. You already know that life does not go according to plan. The body changes. People leave. Roles disappear. Plans fall apart. Sometimes retirement brings freedom. Sometimes it brings a silence you were not prepared for. Sometimes your children are loving but busy. Sometimes they're estranged. Sometimes your marriage changes. You divorce, separate, remarry. Your spouse dies. Sometimes friendships are toxic. Sometimes a doctor says something that hangs in the room long after the appointment ends. And very often, the pain is not only what happened, it is the mind saying, this should not be happening. I want things back the way they were. I don't want this body. I don't want this fear. I don't want this loneliness. I want peace, but I can't seem to find it. Buddhist teaching says, look there, because suffering is deeply tied to wanting. Wanting something you do not have, or not wanting something you do have. That is so much of human misery in one sentence. You want the old body back, you want your sleep back, you want your strength back, you want your spouse to understand. You want your son to call, you want your daughter to worry less. You want the test results to come back clean. You want the past to have gone differently. Or you do not want the pain, you do not want the diagnosis, you do not want the empty chair at the table. You do not want to think about death. And the mind tightens. That tightening is suffering. Not all the pain can be avoided, but Buddhism says a great deal of suffering is added by the mind when it argues with reality. Let me say that again. A great deal of suffering is added by the mind when it argues with reality. There's the ache in the knee, and then there's the second ache. Why is this happening to me? I hate this. I can't live like this. My body has betrayed me. There's the quiet house, and then there's the second sorrow. No one needs me now. I've been forgotten. Life should not have turned out like this. There is the fact, and then there is the struggle with the fact. Buddhist teaching asks us to see the difference. That is where the freedom begins. The Four Noble Truths lay it out very plainly. There is suffering, there's a cause of suffering, there's an end to suffering, and there's a path that leads to the end of suffering. Because if suffering is a cause, then suffering is not random. If suffering can end, then peace is not fantasy. And if there is a path, then you're not helpless. Buddhist teaching says the cause is craving, wanting, resisting, pushing away, grabbing for, demanding that this moment be other than it is. And the end of suffering, it's not just some promise for another life. You see small versions of it every day. A wave of fear appears and then it softens. A craving comes and then it goes. A hurt feeling fills the room. And then an hour later, it's not quite the same. You woke at 3 a.m. convinced everything is heavy. Then morning light comes through the window, you make coffee, and the mind is still the mind, but something has shifted. Because Buddhism is not only teaching that suffering exists, it is teaching that suffering changes, passes, unravels, ends. And once you begin to notice that, you stop believing that every painful state is permanent. That alone changes a life. The path out of suffering is often summed up in 3 words: Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Sila, good conduct. Samadhi, meditation. Panya, wisdom. Sila means living in a way that creates less trouble, less harm, less lying, less cruelty, less intoxication, less regret. Because if you speak harshly all day, if you lie to yourself, if you numb yourself every night, if you carry guilt into bed, the mind will not be peaceful. You may still sit down to meditate, but you will not be sitting down with all that noise. So ethical living is not separate from inner peace, it supports it. Then comes Samadhi, collectiveness, meditation, steadying the mind. Not as an escape, not as a performance, but as a way of letting the mud settle so the water can become clear. This is very practical. You're in a waiting room before a medical test. The mind races into the future. Samadhi says, come back to the breath, come back to the body, come back to this chair and this moment. You're lying awake, replaying something from 20 years ago. Samadhi says, come back, not to the whole story, just to this breath. You are alone on a Sunday afternoon and the mind starts telling you that your life is narrowed, that your best years are gone, that you are fading from the world. Samadhi says, notice the story, do not become the story. And from that steady looking comes Panya, wisdom. Wisdom is seeing clearly how suffering works, how it rises, how it tightens, how it passes, how the mind creates extra pain by clinging, resisting, insisting. Later life makes this teaching very vivid, because later life keeps talking away the illusion that anything was ever fully under your control. The roles change, schedules change, identity changes. Maybe you were the provider, the executive, the caretaker, the one everyone depended on. And then one day, that identity loosens. That can feel frightening. But Buddhist teaching says the suffering is not only that the role changed, the suffering is also in clinging to what you used to be. Saying, I must still be that person. Life must still look that way. I must still be needed in some form. But life moves. Everything conditioned changes. The body changes. Relationships change. Moods change. Pleasures change. Pain changes. Even this sadness changes. That is not a cold truth. That is a merciful one. Because if everything changes, then this dark mood changes, this fear changes, this loneliness changes, this craving changes. Mindfulness can help us see that. And Buddhist teaching makes mindfulness much simpler than people think. It's not magic. It is carefulness, walking carefully, speaking carefully, living carefully, returning attention to what is actually happening. So when you walk from the bedroom to the kitchen, just walk. When you make tea, just make tea. And when you stand in line at the pharmacy, and irritation starts rising, notice it. When the mind runs into the future, come back to the breath. The breath is always a good teacher because it is always with you. You do not have to solve your whole life in one sitting. You do not have to become some perfected spiritual person. You do not even have to begin with certainty. Look, try, practice, see for yourself. And one more thing, a gentle thing. Don't beat yourself up if you slip, if you lose your temper, if you get caught up in worry, if you fall back into old habits, if you forget. Notice it, learn from it, begin again. The path is not about perfection. It's about intention, sincerity, returning. That too is practice. So maybe peace in later life does not come from getting everything you wanted. Maybe it comes from no longer being ruled by wanting. Maybe it begins when you stop demanding that life hold still and start meeting it as it is. The breath, this room, this aging body, this changing life, this one moment, right now.